Great. I'm Dan Palazzolo. I'm a professor of political science at the University of Richmond and co-director of the John Marshall International Center of Statesmanship, along with Gary McDowell at the Jepson School of Leadership Studies. I want to welcome everybody here. This is the second in our lecture series. And as is our custom, after our speaker has the opportunity to talk, we'll have some time for questions. And if for some reason someone can't get the opportunity to ask a question, we also have a reception to follow. So hang in there, if you will. I'd like to ask my colleague, Dr. Stephen Long, Associate Professor of Political Science, to introduce our speaker. Stephen?
That's just like the start of every class that I have. Open round of applause. We wish. Well, we're thrilled to have with us General Michael Hayden this afternoon. General Hayden graduated from Duquesne University in his hometown of Pittsburgh with a bachelor's and a master's in history, and then began his long career of public service in the Air Force. During his 4-decade-long career in the Air Force, General Hayden served as commander of the Air Intelligence Agency and director of the Joint Command and Control Warfare Center, and in senior staff positions at the Pentagon, at the U.S. European Command, at the National Security Council, and the U.S. Embassy in Bulgaria. He was also the Deputy Chief of Staff for the United Nations Command and U.S. forces in South Korea. He won more than 20 military awards and decorations, including the Bronze Star, and retired in 2008 as a 4-star general. General Hayden became better known to the public when he was appointed as the director of the National Security Agency, which he served in that position from 1999 to 2005, and as director of the Central Intelligence Agency from 2006 to 2009. He was no stranger to controversy during his tenure in these offices, becoming known for his vigorous defense of the intelligence value of enhanced interrogation techniques. Pardon me. Somewhat different crowd than I'm accustomed to. And prior to his tenure, and his role in the creation of a secret NSA program to collect bulk records of Americans' phone call metadata, and his role in the expansion of the CIA's targeted killing program against al-Qaeda targets. Through it all, General Hayden has consistently advocated for a stronger, more forward-facing intelligence community, but also one that is less reflexively secretive and overburdened by unnecessary classification. He's resisted political interference in intelligence work and argued against irresponsible rhetoric that appeared during this election season. General Hayden is currently a principal at the Chertoff Group and a distinguished visiting professor at George Mason University's School of Policy, Government, and International Affairs. His recent memoir, Playing to the Edge, American Intelligence in the Age of Terror, was a New York Times bestseller. It's a great honor to have him with us today. Please join me in welcoming General Hayden.
Thank you. All right. So I'm going to go through the same drill. We're on, right? Okay, good. Thanks, Dr. Long. Thank you for the very, very kind introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to come chat. As Dr. Long suggested, I get to talk for a while, but then we get to the fun part. You get to ask questions. By the way, he promised you could get to ask questions. I'm committing to answers, all right? And we're done. And we can resume it in the reception to follow. So lots to cover, but in essence, what I've been asked to do is come on down and just talk about where are we today geopolitically? What does the world look like? And I'll do that, all right? But again, leaving some space at the end for your questions. So, to begin, all right, here we go. So, this is what my Army buddies call the big hand little map slide, where you kind of get to go like this, all right? And just give a broad sense of direction. Three macro statements, all right? As bad as it seems, I'm old enough, and I'm looking around, and I think some of you are old enough to remember the world was actually more dangerous than it is today. I can remember the Cuban Missile Crisis when I was in high school. I can remember Soviet and American armor, barrel to barrel at Checkpoint Charlie. And if you go to Berlin, you know you're at Checkpoint Charlie, but you can't recognize it. I mean, all the landmarks are gone. I was a captain in America's Air Force in October of 1973 when we went to DEFCON 3. All right, DEFCON 5 is normal. DEFCON 1, you're actually tossing the stuff back and forth. We went to 3 because we thought the Soviets were pushing funny weapons through the Bosporus to their Arab allies because there was an Israeli army on the African side of the Suez Canal with nothing between them and Cairo. So I've seen it more dangerous. I have never seen it more complicated. I use a silly little cartoonish metaphor here that I imagine I'm back in the sit room and we're having a meeting and it's all about Syria and Iraq. And I picture the whole problem as being this ugly fur ball. And out of the fur ball, I got hard spikes. That's ISIS, that's Al Qaeda, that's Bashar al-Assad, Kurds, the Iranians, the Russians. And I picture Susan Rice, Ambassador Rice, the National Security Advisor, said, all right, guys, I'm really fretting about that spike there. Pick whichever one you want, the Russian spike, all right? You really got to take care of the Russian spike. Well, I told you it was a cartoon, right? But you know what happens when you push the Russian spike down? Yeah, right. Never seen it more complicated. And finally, I've never seen it more immediate. And here, I'm not just talking about you and I are going to get to see somebody's unhappy cell phone video tonight, no matter which 7x24 network we see. I mean, we document the evil afoot in the world. That's important. That the interconnectedness, the immediacy is not just the communications. It's the fact when something happens here, things go bump over here nearly immediately and substantially. All right? So three macro statements. So here's a list of interesting characters, and I could start at 12 o'clock there, and go over to 2:30, 3 o'clock there with the latest representative of the fun-loving Kim family from North Korea, and just walk our way through all that. And frankly, I could fill the space, and it would probably be pretty interesting. But my sense is it's not the best use of our time. And so rather than trying to predict whose cell phone video you're going to see tonight, or where the bouncing ball is going to end up for tomorrow morning's newspaper, I'm going to try to talk about what I frame as tectonics. All right, so I'm not going to predict where the earth is going to shake or where the seas are going to roil. I'm going to look at some of those fundamental shifts. What are the basal plates that are moving around that actually will cause the earth to shake and the seas to roil, okay? So I've got 4 to 5, and you probably wonder, how come you lost count, Hayden? Is it 4 or is it 5? When I get to number 5, I'll explain why I say 4 or 5, all right? So, tectonics, fundamental things that are going on. So, tectonic 1, that's Brent Scowcroft. Brent was my boss. I was on 41's National Security Council staff. He is probably still the greatest strategic mind living today in the United States. National Security Advisor, not just for Bush, but for Ford. All right, he was in the job twice. He wrote an article about 4 years ago now, as you can see the date up there. He wrote an article for the Atlantic Council in which he fundamentally said, when I was doing my thing, all the pieces on the board were pretty much nation states. And the way I moved a piece around was through what you and I have now taken to call hard power. And for those of you not familiar with the term hard power, masses of men and metal at the right place at the right time. And if we liked you, it was the promise of. If we didn't like you, it was the threat of. Nation states, hard power. What Brent says in this article is that neither of those sentences are as true as they were when he was National Security Advisor. And he goes on to point out that he was National Security Advisor at the height, Ford, the back end, 41, of the industrial era. And bear with me just a little bit. I'm going to go into a little bit of kind of socioeconomic background, but it really matters. What Brent points out is that in the industrial era, everything trended to the center. In the industrial era, we all relied on large, centralized institutions. There's a better way of putting it. You couldn't be somebody in the industrial era without large, centralized institutions. All right? We relied on government, for example, to build the infrastructure of an example here in our own country. Republican Party, remember, for Lincoln and emancipation. But they spent the rest of the 19th century building the infrastructure, control of the Congress, control of the White House, building the infrastructure that allows us to explode onto the global stage in the 20th century as the premier industrial power of the world. Communism, bad theory of history, worst theory of government. Not bad if what it is you want to do is to rapidly industrialize a backward, agrarian, near feudal society. Why? Because it concentrates power in the center. You'll remember this. I'm old enough to remember when making a phone call was so complicated, you and I trusted it and trusted that task only to a government or a government-controlled monopoly. Remember? Okay, it was power to the center. We just naturally trended. Again, in order to get stuff done, you needed strong centralized control. What Brent points out is we're no longer in that era. We are in the post-industrial information age, World Wide Web, interconnected, you can fill in the blank, era. And as the industrial era pulled power to the center, this pushes power to the edge. Okay? You no longer need centralized power to get things done. In fact, you can push power way out to the edge to get things done. Again, I'm old enough to remember I used to have to put a shirt on, get in the car, drive the car, park the car, get out of the car, go into a building, and talk to a human being to get my money. All right? We don't do that anymore. How many here have used Zillow? All right? Zillow gives you and me, with 2 or 3 clicks, things for which we used to have to go to an empowered, professionalized group of people. How long on the market, comparables, and so on. I'm old enough to remember only 2 countries used to take pictures from space. And frankly, only one of them did it really well. And if you want, you can go back home tonight, pull up Google Earth or some comparable program, and you can look at North Korea with sufficient granularity that you can tell me whether they're stacking a Taepodong missile or not. By the way, that's all awesome. That's really great. I mean, it has made us what we are in the early 21st century. We are better for it. Our lives are more rich. We are more individually empowered, and all that is a good. But it is not an unalloyed good. One more, I'm old enough. I'm old enough to remember I never lost any sleep over a religious fanatic living in a cave in the Hindu Kush. But we do. Why? Because we have pushed power to the edge. And the punchline here, okay, the punchline here is that things that we used to fear coming at us because of malevolent state power now can come at us from sub-state groups, gangs, and even individuals. And frankly, I'm going to go through 3 or 4 more tectonics, but this is a big one. Most of your national security structure was hardwired in 1947. It's designed to protect you against nation states. That's not the problem. I'm going to get to nation states before I'm done. But fundamentally, the stuff that can go bump tonight and upset your world, that's not going to be the product of a nation state coming at us. Besides this kind of power to the edge, there's this interconnectivity thing going on. All right, this is a map of the great age of discovery 500 years ago. It is actually the last great era of globalization. All right, this one created the greatest explosion in human commerce, human learning, and human development in science in the history of the world up to that point. It also gave us global epidemics, the global slave trade, and global piracy. And that was interconnectivity at 12 knots an hour with a favoring wind. And you and I are wired at 186,000 miles a second. And so what that leads to is the new flavor of threat. Cyber, terrorism, transnational crime. Now, some of you may be thinking, any of these can be used by a nation state. Okay? But you've got to agree, none of them require a nation state to actually be a clear and present danger to us. So So that's the first tectonic, all right? That the nature of threat, the nature of power has fundamentally changed. In a way we've never experienced before, the most urgent, maybe not the most existential, but the most urgent dangers coming at us are actually coming at us from non-state actors. Tectonic 2. We're still kind of in the level of metaphysics here, but bear with me. I'm going to get to some nation states in a minute. Tectonic 2, things that we thought were permanent aren't. So I'm up in Baltimore. The Republicans in the Congress were having their offsite. They do it every year. They do it early in the congressional session. They come back early from a long weekend. They bring the kids, spouses up to Baltimore, put them in a nice hotel in the Inner Harbor. They do what tourism there is in Baltimore. The members meet for a day and a half. They have a series of panels. You know, one's on the economy, one's on trade. I was invited to come up and be on the panel for this stuff. Be on the panel for geopolitics, national security. And it was a great panel. Mike Chertoff, former Secretary of Homeland Security. Ray Odierno, former Chief of Staff of America's Army. Ryan Crocker, former ambassador to every tough spot on earth, Baghdad, Islamabad. Me, and Bob Kagan, political scientist from Brookings, which is kind of a really highly regarded, really center of the road think tank up in Washington. No far to this, no center of the road. So we're there. By the way, you're very polite. You're just listening, nodding occasionally. That's good. Republicans are not that way. Okay? At least not Republican members of Congress. I mean, this panel became really interactive. I'm being kind with interactive, all right? Okay. We're getting questions from the moderator. We're going back and forth. These people are jumping up. They're calling us. They're going back at one another. And finally Kagan, Bob Kagan from Brookings, he almost kind of stands up and he kind of lays his hand on the situation. He said, look, wait, look. What's going on is the melting down of the post-World War II Bretton Woods, American liberal, World Bank, IMF, world order. Get it? And that is actually what's going on. So I said, boy, Bob, that's really smart. And I thought about it in the car coming back from Baltimore, going down the BW Parkway, and it struck me that as good as Bob was, he had undershot. We are not seeing just the melting down of the post-World War II order. In many ways, we're seeing the melting down of the post-World War I order. And here I'm essentially talking about the state structure created almost literally 100 years ago. So you've seen it melt down in Europe, all right? Countries, the way I tell the story is, you know, that's the map you used to stare at when you weren't lucky enough in algebra to have a seat near the window. So you could look outside, right? And what am I going to do? I don't want to follow the polynomial. I'll look at the map. And I don't know about you, but I just kind of thought that was the map. It wasn't a map. It was the map. And countries on that map no longer exist. Czechoslovakia, velvet divorce. Czech Republic, Slovak Republic. Yugoslavia, literally, land of the South Slavs. Yuk, in every Slavic language, South. Gone. Nothing velvety. 250,000 people dead. Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. Okay, not created by Versailles, but came into existence at the time of Versailles. And now, move your glance to the east. Move it to the Eastern Mediterranean. Move it to the Middle East. And you got, I just downloaded that kind of doodle from the web, but that's kind of true. Let me cut to the chase. Iraq doesn't exist. The only organized military force in Iraq today fighting on behalf of what you and I used to call Iraq are the 4,500 Americans. There is no other armed group in that country fighting for Iraq. They're fighting for their part of Iraq. Syria doesn't exist. It's not going back together. I'm doing a Morning Joe thing. Last time Secretary Kerry tried to get a ceasefire with the Russians and so on, I was appropriately pessimistic. I actually said that Secretary Kerry had said, this may be our last chance to preserve a unified Syria. And I commented to Scarborough, that train is so far out of the station. Okay? Lebanon may be gone. I don't know. Libya is certainly gone. All right? And so I guess what I'm trying to say, things that seem to be permanent aren't. Or put another way, remember that polynomial I said were up there? Things we thought were constants turned out to be variables. And that's why this equation is getting really wicked hard to solve. I mean, let me be very candid. This is not about getting rid of Bashar al-Assad, which would be a good idea, okay, and restoring democracy to Syria. There is no Syria. And these people are not going to go back into the same box. That's what I mean by complexity. So, post-World War II melting, post-World War I melting. And then, let me double down. I'm a history major, as Dr. Long said. So, we're even seeing melting down the Treaty of Westphalia that ended the 30 Years' War in 1648. Okay? This is the last great war of religion in Christendom. This, at Westphalia, we in the West kind of said, okay, all the sacred stuff over here, all the secular stuff over here. The theology in that corner, coercive power of the state in this corner. And we kind of scratched religion off the list of legitimate reasons to kill one another. All right? By the way, we in the West call that being modern. Okay? No, seriously, we date modernity from this period in the middle of the 17th century. It has to do with enlightenment and science and a whole bunch of things. But this is the political expression of being modern. And we made the assumption that we could export that to the rest of the world, and that was a resolved question, and that everyone accepted it. And as you can tell from the graphics behind me, not everyone accepts that. So you got Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, he's the caliph, all right? He is the head of the Islamic State, which we may, in a few months, make disappear physically, all right? But I've already told you the nation states that used to exist there aren't coming back. And frankly, to be very candid, this other great monotheism, Islam, is having the debate we in Christendom had in the 17th century. What is the separation between the sacred and the secular? What is the role of the coercive power of the state in questions of belief? And they may not come up with the same answer we did. But that is what is going on here. And just so you don't assume this is just a kind of an Islam problem, I got Vladimir Vladimirovich up there, okay? And I got some little highlighted points on the map. One of the core beliefs of Versailles was if you're born in X, if you live in X, you're an Xer. Vlad is saying, I got an additional definition of what constitutes citizenship. What language mom and dad used to speak in the kitchen while you were growing up. And he actually believes that he has not just the right but the responsibility to protect Russian speakers, even when they're outside of what we all agree now are the boundaries of the Russian Federation. That is, by the way, as destabilizing of the concepts of Westphalia as is the creation of a caliphate. So again, I'm back to this is fundamental stuff happening here. All right? I got to just wrap it up here because it's kind of last time I'll touch on the Middle East. It's going to take 1 to 2 generations to sort out in the Middle East within Islam. Doesn't necessarily mean your Air Force is going to be bombing and strafing that long. But this isn't settling down for a long period of time. Okay. Tectonic 3, a little more traditional. States that are ambitious, brittle, and nuclear. This is kind of the proliferation tectonic we've got to look at, all right? I've got 4 here. How about these guys? All right. How about this for an attention-getting step? Within our current definition of acceptable risk for us, before President Trump ends his first administration, North Korea will be able to reach Seattle with a nuclear weapon aboard an intercontinental ballistic missile. And that's a fact. Okay? So that's one you got to worry about. The Russians are trending nuclear again. I mean, I spent a quarter century of my life doing the math with these guys. Mutually assured destruction, stability, weaponizing, warheads, START, SALT, all that stuff. I thought it was history. It's back. They are rearming in a nuclear way. They are reinventing their nuclear doctrine. They talk about nuclear first use, believe it or not, as a de-escalatory step in a conventional conflict they might be losing. And they are investing in nuclear weapons. So the sad part is we're going to have to go do the same. All We are going to have to re-energize our nuclear arsenal. Okay? And by the way, that nuclearizing thing is on top of all this other behavior, be it the DNC emails or what happened in the Crimea or what's going on in the Donbass or threatening the Baltic states or cozying up to the Iranians, or in the lower right-hand corner, Russian aircraft and ships getting dangerously close to American ships and aircraft in international waters. Iran, another one. Remember, we're on ambitious, brittle, and nuclear. All right? Now, I am not going to get into a debate about the pluses and minuses of the Iran nuclear deal. All right? And I know this is a little hard to read, but what those arrows point out are the things that the administration, that Secretary Kerry said, are good about the deal. All right? These are the things that the deal is going to stop. And I'm not going to argue that point. All I'm going to say is, if all of that is true, in 10 years, Iran will be an industrial-strength nuclear nation, never more than a few weeks away from enough fissile material for a nuclear device. And that's a successful deal, okay? I mean, because the provisions age off, they're allowed to do other things, and so on. And then finally, remember, ambitious, fragile, nuclear, Pakistan. You kind of get the impression of Pakistan from the image there. All right. This is a map put out by the Fund for Peace. It's called the Failed States Index. At least it used to be called the Failed States Index until the failed states complained. And now it's called the States Under Stress Index. Okay? It's color-coded. Really dark red is really bad. Red is pretty bad. Look at Pakistan. It's the same color as Afghanistan. It's the same color as Iraq. Actually, in the list the year before this year, Pakistan, they rack and stack all 171 countries in the world based upon how stable are they. It's a good place, bad place. I think they have 12 criteria. It's actually pretty scientific. It's disciplined. They give you scores on different criteria that should or should not contribute to stability. If you're curious, we're in the mid-20s from the good end. Okay, there are about 24 countries they view to be a bit less fragile than us. Okay, we get marked down for distribution of wealth and failed political processes. Okay, we're at the wrong end of the. By the way, you don't want to live in Finland anyway, right? We are the first multicultural continental power on the list, which should actually make us feel a little bit good about we can do some things pretty well. Sorry, wrong end of the list. Let's go to the other end. Pakistan is number 13, wedged comfortably between Haiti and Zimbabwe. They have 120 nuclear weapons, and they are creating nuclear devices literally faster than any other country on Earth as we speak. So I guess the summary of Tectonic 3 is there's more of this stuff out there. And over time. Okay, Tectonic 4, again, pretty traditional, China. So let me begin this with the way I've begun it for 10 years, which goes back before I left government. These guys are not enemies of the United States of America. In fact, there aren't any good reasons for China to become an enemy of the United States. There are logical, non-heroic policy choices available to us and to the Chinese that keep the relationship competitive. Oh, God, yeah. Occasionally confrontational? Yeah, probably. Never has to get to the level of conflict. And then I've added, in those 10 years, and by the way, I've checked this recently, and then I've added people like me, because I talk to people like me, we spend as much time fretting about Chinese failure as Chinese success, Chinese weakness, as we do Chinese strength. I mean, this is an absolute economic miracle. These people have pulled 400 million human beings into a genuine middle-class existence in one generation. Okay? That's awesome. But there are incredible structural problems within the Chinese state. They got a demographic pyramid with a point on the wrong end. If you think your Social Security is a Ponzi scheme, imagine what this society is now with a one-child policy pushing 4 generations. By the way, I hadn't thought about this, but I talked to a China expert, and I got the demographic thing, and no safety net and shrinking. But they're actually now localized labor shortages in a country of 1.3 billion people because of the one-child policy. But my friend, the China specialist, pointed out something I hadn't thought of, which should be obvious. This is a society based a great deal on family. Okay? This is a society based a great deal on family without brothers, sisters, cousins, aunts, or uncles. Now, I don't know what that means, but it's going to be really interesting. Besides the demographic problem, top left there, you've got the environmental problem. I'm a fellow at the U.S. Chamber. They estimate the Chinese lose about 10, 11% of GDP a year due to environmental impact. You've got, I mentioned our maldistribution of wealth. You ought to see theirs. Those of you who've been to China, been along the coast, been to Shanghai, been to Beijing, looks like us. You go inland, it looks like China, 400 years ago. A real severe maldistribution of wealth. And then finally, you've got the question of, I used to have a picture up here of Xi Jinping with President Obama. And my flippant quote was, that guy there, who died and made him emperor? Okay, why is Xi Jinping in charge? Of course, the answer is because he's head of the Communist Party. And then I come back with, yeah, I get that. Why is he in charge? And it's not ideology. All right? I mean, this has nothing to do with Marx, Engels, Lenin, or even Mao. All right? It's not Confucian merit. If you follow the blogosphere in China, you know Confucian merit is not a legitimate claim to governance because of the great degree of corruption. It's fundamentally kind of my left arm here, which is my mimicking the GDP growth in China over the last 20 years, which has been about 10% a year. Now, people who know tell me my arm was too high, and people who really know tell me my hand is misplaced. So the social contract in China from the party was, hey, we're going to be autocratic, but don't sweat it, you're going to be rich. And now, if the party can't deliver on the you're going to be rich, what's the appetite for the population to accept Communist Party autocratic rule? What does the party then use to justify its rule? And I'm afraid it's that. And that's, some visual representations of those sandcastles in the South China Sea. Lower left is something called the 9-dash line, which is the Chinese territorial claims to the waters in the South China Sea. They expect us to let them treat that the way you and I expect to treat Lake Michigan. Okay? Graham Allison, a professor up at the Kennedy School, and Graham comes down to DC occasionally, becomes an assistant secretary or something, goes back to Harvard and writes a book. Graham has a wonderful summary of this. Graham says, we've seen this movie before. This is the dynamic of an emerging power and a status quo power. And, we've got examples. How did those poor people in Sparta deal with those arrogant, uppity newcomers from Athens? All right? And Graham, in his writing, says in the modern era, kind of the industrial era, kind of the 500 years from the European exploration, he says in the modern era, we have seen this repeated about 24 times. Emerging power, status quo power. And Graham goes on to point out that inevitably, we find a way to get from the old equilibrium, pre-emergence, to the new equilibrium, post-emergence. And then Graham goes on to point out, in about 2 out of the 3 cases, though, of those 24 examples, the mechanism we use to go from the old to the new equilibrium is a process that is popularly called global war. So, I was actually very careful back there on Tectonic 1 and 2. Things that can go bump in the night, terrorism and the cyber and transnational, they're the most urgent. Those are stuff that can go bad because a youngster makes a bad decision in the TSA line at Dulles overnight, all right? This is pass-fail. This is the fundamental issue of American diplomacy and, I think, global stability for the 21st century. don't get this right, it really almost doesn't matter about the other stuff. This is really, really important. Okay, so that's the fourth tectonic. Here's the fifth, and now you know why I said 4 or 5, I don't know. You're the fifth. All right? Okay, the United States is one of the global tectonics. And by the way, if we weren't down here in Richmond, if we were, 50 miles south of Paris, rather than Washington, and I wasn't the former head of CIA, I was the former head of DGSE, and I wasn't talking to you about tectonics, but laying out the Tectonic, okay? This would be on my list, and it would not be number 5. The whole world's watching us. What is it the Americans think they owe the solution to the 4 things I put up there before? Now, this is hard for me to talk about, all right? I'm an Intel guy. I talk about red, I don't talk about blue. So for this, I kind of default to a political scientist that you all probably know, Walter Russell Mead, whom I really enjoy reading. Mead says you can organize all American administrations into one of 4 macro models, and he attaches an historic personage to each one of the models. Okay, so you could be a Hamiltonian administration. Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury, aide de camp, great play, magnificent rapper. Okay. Hamiltonian foreign policy. America cannot be free unless America is prosperous. America cannot be prosperous unless America is strong. See the thread? Very powerful, very clear. Mitt Romney would have been a Hamiltonian president. I can say that because that thing I just said, prosperous, free, powerful, he said in the second debate 4 years ago. Hamiltonian foreign policy wrapped around American prosperity, American freedom, American power, all in sort of a combination. Okay, Wilsonian, American idealism. All right, make the world safe for democracy, the war to end all wars, kind of packaging our manifest destiny from the 19th and exporting it in the 20th and even early in the 21st century. We actually do have a better idea. These principles actually are universal. I mean, we can't quite impose them on other people, but we got to try. We've got to push it out the door. American idealism, Wilsonian foreign policy. The third, Jefferson. All right, a fellow Virginian, third president. I know he waged war in North Africa. He bought Louisiana. I got it. But fundamentally, he was not a look outside the country kind of guy. He was very fundamentally an inward turning sort of guy. Shining city on the hill, we've got our own work to do. There was an undeclared naval war while Jefferson was president. It was off of New England and off of Hampton Roads. It was an undeclared naval war. We weren't playing. It was between France and Great Britain. Right? But they were, both navies were grabbing our merchantmen in both meanings of the word, both our sailors and our ships. Right? So, what are we, a republic? We're about 15 years old as a republic. We're kind of teenagers. We kind of got an attitude. Hey, what are you doing? Depredations right off of Hampton Roads? Come on, Mr. President, do something. So Jefferson's something was to have Congress pass a series of laws, which, again, I don't think this is a good name for a law then or now, called the Non-Intercourse Acts. Okay. That gave the president the authority to tell American merchantmen not to sail. Let me tell you how we're going to do this. Let me tell you how we're going to avoid the French and the British navies. We aren't going there. We're turning inward. Okay. Jackson, fourth model. Mead's summary of Jacksonian diplomacy is really quite interesting. He says, people watch Fox News. Okay. Now, my words now, not his. A diplomacy organized around Robert De Niro's immortal words in Taxi Driver. You talking to me? The president I served for most of my time at NSA and CIA, President Bush, was unarguably Wilsonian. I used to sit in the Oval, right? And what I'm telling you now is not me thinking back to the Oval. What I'm telling you now is me remembering what it was I was thinking when I was in the Oval. All right, so you're there, you're doing your one-on-one with the president, you get done, you can't be going in and out, you just get off the couch and you go back to one of the chairs in the outside circle, somebody else is in there, and you continue to watch. But it gives you a little time. I mean, you can't go catatonic, all right? I mean, you can't have the president say, well, what do you think, Mike? And you go, Oh, Mr. President, really wasn't following along there. I mean, so you're paying attention, but you do have a little leftover gray matter to think thoughts. And I truly do. And Dr. Long pointed out, I'm a history guy, BA and MA. I remember this has got to be the most Wilsonian guy in this office since Wilson. Okay. The freedom agenda, the second inaugural address, I mean, very powerfully Wilsonian. More than a little touch of Jackson going on there, too. All right, now, I wasn't there, but I saw the B-roll of it, and I've talked to people who were there. There's a scene in the Bush administration, it had to be 43-1, because it was when Iraq was really heading south. So it's probably 04-ish, maybe early 05. And I don't remember the fine print, but the president's in casual clothes, and the Marine One had just landed, so I'm guessing it's a Sunday. He's coming back from Camp David. All the man wants to do is get back into his house. And he's walking there past the rope line, and the reporters are all there. He doesn't have to stop. He doesn't have to talk. But a reporter barks out something along the lines of, Mr. President, you got that? It's a really horrible insurgency going on now in Iraq. And the president, remember, he doesn't have to do anything. The president stops, turns, steps, points, and says, bring it on. Pure Jackson. Pure Jackson. You could make the case that if your foreign policy is informed by a Wilsonian and Jackson view of the world, Wilsonian and Jacksonian view of the world, you may be leaning a little forward in your policy. President Obama, I think, is equally Wilsonian. All right? Speech in Cairo, speech in Ankara. For God's sake, he gave a speech in Prague that talked about a world without nuclear weapons, and it was a policy proposal. All right? That's about as Wilsonian as you can get. I also think there's a lot of Jefferson happening here, too. Otherwise, you don't get Al-Qaeda's on the run, the tide of war is receding, and it's time to do nation building at home. That's pure Jefferson. Do you remember the speech at West Point in 2009? That's the Afghan surge. All right? So the president goes to West Point. It's a late speech. By the way, giving a speech after 8 o'clock to the Corps of Cadets is a high-risk endeavor. All right? Those kids have been up for a long time. All right? And that camera's panning, you know. Anyway, he's at West Point. I figure this is going to be a long speech. I'm going to get 5 miles in. So I get down to the basement. We've got our treadmill and so on. I got the speech on. I'm running. At one point in the speech, I damn near killed myself. Because the President of the United States had this sequence of logic. Afghanistan is a good war. Afghanistan is a war we've got to win. We've got to commit to winning in Afghanistan. We're going to surge in Afghanistan for about a year. Okay, you got it. I mean, surge and time limit. Okay. The current administration, I criticize it, but others have too, for being indecisive. All right, and I've talked to folks in government. I think there's some merit to the charge. They kind of admire the problem for a long time and decide to meet again. To be fair, there could be a lot of inner Wilson fighting with inner Jeffersons going on in that. And so now you've heard we're going to have another president. Okay? I've only caught little smatterings, but Meade thinks the president-elect is Jacksonian. Broadly speaking, distrustful of the alien and quick to take offense was his summary of President-elect Trump's foreign policy. So, in that light, I decided to lay out what I think the Trump Doctrine is. Now, at the risk of being a bit more coherent than the campaign, what I did was try to aggregate what I saw in the campaign and to try to distill what I thought were the fundamental principles, okay, that would be guiding it. And by the way, this is not a syllogism, you know, whereas, therefore. I'm talking about kind of moving where the center line is, if you know what I mean. I mean, now I've got 5 issues there, 6 issues, where the center line's moving. I can't tell you how far it's going to move. Can't tell you if it's going to move back. But right now, based upon the campaign rhetoric, all right, here is my sense as to where the center lines are going. So number one, immigration, which I think certainly I, but I think most of us, for most of our history, has viewed as a natural American advantage. It keeps our population younger and more entrepreneurial and more creative than it would otherwise be. Okay, is now moving in the direction of being seen more as of a threat than as a national advantage. So that's one kind of shifting of the center line. Another one, foreign engagements. All right, I think it's clear from the campaign, if we do anything over there, it's going to be short and limited and as a last resort. This is really interesting. That makes President-elect Trump a lot like President Obama. They're, you know, when you peel away the language, which I understand is quite different, all right, it's a short putt between America first and the current administration's retrenchment. All right, let me double down on that one more time. So if you put the three of them up there, Secretary Clinton, President Obama, President-elect Trump, President Obama and the President-elect are a pretty tight shot group on this question. Odd person out is Secretary of State. She would have been the one who was more interventionist. There's a great line in one of those Saturday night things, Saturday Night Live, you know, and they're doing the mock debate, and finally at the point Secretary Clinton says, "Vote for me, the Republican." And in that sense, she was, of the three, she was and is the best representation of what we've historically called Republican internationalism. Right? So we're going to see a continuation of this reluctance centerline move. The third, free trade. It will be couched as, I'm for free trade, but we have to make it fair trade. I fear, though, it's going to be at the expense of, frankly, something we have favored since like forever, certainly since 1945. It's a little puzzling. The world's largest, most powerful, and most envied economy backing away from the competition that globalization implies. Alliances, more transactional than strategic. Yeah, we'll defend you if you pay. All right. We'll see how far that goes. I'm talking, you know, the center line is going to move. When the realities hit a new administration, how far it goes, I don't know. But the president-elect has been pretty consistent about viewing this as transactional rather than strategic, as a burden rather than a strategic benefit. And the transaction has generally been viewed in strictly fiscal terms rather than broader considerations of value. I just have to add as a footnote, U.S. forces in Germany, Japan, and South Korea have been targeted as an example of they got to pay. You realize each of those countries pay billions of dollars every year for U.S. forces. And if we were to remove those forces from any of those countries and bring them home, we can't afford them. The only way we save money with those forces is to make them go away. So we'll see where that center line goes. Yeah, the peer and near peer. Quite interesting. I'm speculating China down, and not, based on the rhetoric, not on the South China Sea stuff, not on the human rights stuff. China down for currency manipulation and dumping of products here. Kind of, again, that economic lens, and I don't think I have to elaborate much on Russia up, based upon some of the language of the campaign. And then the fight against terror, viewed more as the willing application of combat power as a solution rather than other things. And I have to be fair, I think we're in a pretty good place now, Syria, Iraq, that Tectonic 2 thing and where that all is going. But it's taken us a long time. I've been public that I thought our response was late and light and under-resourced and over-regulated. But we're in a pretty dominant position now. The Islamic State, as a state, is going to go away in several months. But the president-elect and, frankly, his national security advisor designate have run on, I'm going to bomb the blank out of these people. I just offer you the view as somebody who's taken part in that for a long time. If we could kill our way out of this, we'd have been done 12 years ago. And because we're really good at that. And so I think it's insufficient. So we'll see. I mean, I guess I'm being a bit critical, but I don't mean to be. I just mean that going in position is going to be a little bit different than the going out position of the last administration, and we'll see how it holds. All right? Like I said, if we're doing this in the rest of the world, that's Tectonic 1. Everyone's looking at us. Janine, my wife Janine's here with me. We were in Wales in June at a magnificent book festival, literary art festival called Hayden. All right? And Hayden doesn't have any hotels. It's a real small village. But they've got this magnificent festival, tents and temporary structures and so on. So the people who are there, I was there pushing my book, people who are there get put up in country homes. Right? And so, you know, you're down at the festival during the day, but breakfast and dinner are really interesting. Oh, Nobel Prize winner. Interesting. I mean, these were really magnificent world artists. Two topics of conversation continually: Brexit and the American presidential campaign. Okay, and I do remember one comment. It was actually from a Briton, but it could have come from the Colombian or the Brazilian or any other number of people who were at the table. At the end of one of these long conversations, he simply said, "You Americans do realize how much we depend on you to do the right thing, don't you?" So, there you go. This is David Rothkopf's a good friend of mine. He said, in 20 years, we have gone from a bipolar world to a bipolar superpower. And look, honest people can President Bush is kind of this way. President Obama is kind of this way. Maybe President Trump is that way. I don't know. All of us can argue, well, no, this is good, that's bad, we can argue about any of these, but can we all agree that this is really bad? And that's where we've been. And as I said, a lot of good people in the world are looking at us, not because we're special, just because at this point in history, we are who we are. And only we possess these attributes. So, be happy to take any questions you might have. Thank you. Sir.
What are your thoughts about Congressman Pompeo?
I was actually heartened by the choice. All right. I know him a bit. It's not all that intimate, but I've talked to him. He's serious. He's studied. He actually has a lot of knowledge about these issues. Now, I know at the political level, he's got a little Benghazi committee background. He's got a little email server background. Okay, I get all that. But I'm still heartened by the choice. I think he's a responsible guy. And to the degree things were done over here of a political nature, that may be what people in Congress do. I think he'll understand he is now head of the nation's espionage service. And so I'm like I said, I'm heartened that he was chosen. Sure.
Given the changes in U.S.-Russian relations, especially with the latest election, how will that play out in Syria?
Yeah. The question is U.S., Russia. I'm repeating. So the question is U.S. and Russia and how that play out in Syria, right? So I am of the belief that there is no convergence between American and Russian interests in Syria, all right? And they are not bombing ISIS, right? That's just a fact. So it's going to be really interesting when the president-elect starts getting those intel briefings and they start pointing out, no, ISIS is over here, they're bombing over here. So that's going to be a really interesting dynamic. The Russians are there to bolster the Assad regime as their presence in the Middle East. The existence of the Assad regime is the fuel that fires Sunni jihadism. Right? So we can continue to kill these people, and we're doing that, and that's good, and we're shrinking the state. But as long as you've got this thing going on here, you've kind of got this production rate of jihadists happening over here. And so, you know, it is a wicked problem. I don't have an easy answer, but there is not a facile convergence of American and Russian strategic interests. There may be tactical areas where we can cooperate. That's all the way in the back.
I first just want to say thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
It's a really exciting opportunity. But I wanted to ask you if you think, in reference to that first Tectonic, whether we are, as the United States, a safer country or a less safe country today as a result of the sort of exposure and then getting rid of the NSA wiretapping?
Sure. So obviously, I'm in favor of the NSA wiretapping. I'm the one who did it, okay? Yeah. The question was, how safe are we, and the changes in law and policy? Yeah, look, so when I do this on a longer form and dwell on Tectonic 1, remember I said 1947, hardwired? 1947, National Security Act of 47 created CIA, National Security Council, Secretary of Defense, Joint Chiefs of Staff, and America's Air Force. Okay? Your security structure is wired to go this way and defend you against malevolent power, malevolent state power. And then after 9/11, oh, that ain't the problem. Ugh. So how do I take a structure designed to do this and make it do that? I'm getting to your question. Hang on, right? And make it come. So it's not coming this way. It's coming this way. So it's, well, we can adjust. So we did it. So to give you an example, so you go to me. I'm a GI, and the president says, "Hey, we're now at war with Al Qaeda." It's kind of not a country, but we're at war with Al Qaeda. I said, "Okay, I got it, boss. War. Close with and destroy the enemy." We have killed the enemy in every conflict in which we've been engaged. Okay? Chateau Theory, Normandy, Incheon. What's it look like here? It looks like targeted killings from unmanned aerial vehicles outside of internationally agreed theaters of conflict. Okay? So in my cartoon, the American people, oh, slow down, Hayden. What else you got? I'm a little uncomfortable. I said, well, we've actually captured people in every war we've been in. There are literally hundreds of thousands of Axis prisoners in North America. There's a graveyard at Fort Meade, German soldiers who died in captivity of natural causes during World War II. Yeah, okay, good. Why don't let's do the capture thing. What's that look like? Guantanamo. All right, Hayden, you're really getting me off here. What do you have left? I said, well, I could do that intel thing. I could actually predict where the enemy might try to come hurt us. I could intercept their communications. You know, Bletchley Park, Enigma, you saw the movie. Yeah. Purple, Battle of Midway. What's that look like? All that stuff Edward Snowden told you about. Do you see what's going on? We are having a grand national debate about how to take a security structure that was designed, and more importantly, legitimated to go this way. And now we're turning it this way, and quite understandably, we're having arguments with ourselves. And so when we throttle back on the bulk collection, or we throttle ahead on targeted killing, which this president did, all right, it is in effect trying to find the sweet spot for going over here. So I will personally say, no, we should have kept the bulk collection. Okay? But I understand broadly what's going on. I understand broadly we're still trying to settle on a comfortable course of action as a nation. So I'll argue my point, but I'm not going to fall on my sword over metadata in the 215 program. All right. Are we less safe? Yeah. How good's the current program? 85% of the old one. All right. And I can do the same math for targeted killing and so on. So that's broadly what's happening here. By the way, of those things I said, terrorism, cyber, and transnational crime, despite all this and despite all the arguments, we are actually more mature in our decision-making fighting terrorism than we are fighting cyber attack. We have no idea what it is we want the government to do to fight cyber attack. Ma'am.
I'm a high school student, and we do a program called We the People. It's a constitutional debate. And our question to this is, how does the government have a compelling interest in collecting and storing internet data? And where is a warrant involved, and when is it appropriate?
Okay, so the question is collection, warrant, appropriateness, government's license. So I'll be boy, we got yeah. So I'll be try to be efficient. I'm an espionage guy. I'm not a law enforcement guy. All right, so I'm going to talk to you about foreign intelligence. The FBI's got other questions. You can go. Okay. Americans have a Manichaean view of the world when it comes to foreign intelligence. We are very binary. Are you or are you not protected by the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution? Now, our European friends have this kind of fuzzy, universal human right to privacy. We don't do that, okay? Fourth Amendment, we're staying away. Not Fourth Amendment, game on. Now, not game on randomly, not game on for pure interest. Game on for if we believe your communications contain information that will help keep Americans safe or free, we're going to go get them. Now, remember I separated myself from the cops. And we don't care whether you're a bad person or not. All right? So that when I get accused of suspicionless surveillance, I go, okay? We go after the communications not protected by the Fourth Amendment, whose knowledge, if we had, would make you safer or guarantee your freedom. So that, for example, I got a travel agent in country A talking to a travel agent in country B, and I'm interested in whose travel they're arranging. I'm going after the comms. They're good people. I got no case against them. I just want to know who's getting on that airplane. And there's a whole bunch of things like that. And so, I guess a couple of thoughts I'd give you just to kind of think about the problem. Separate this from law enforcement. Separate this from domestic. It's foreign. It's intelligence collection. We are very aggressive. And we do it without apology. The only difference between us and most other countries is y'all give us a lot more money than they have. Seriously. I mean, no foreign intelligence service would argue with what I just said. It's just that we're real big. Yeah.
Why don't you thank me and applaud? That was a terrific speech. I want to thank everybody for coming. I have a couple of notes for us. We had a section in the Brown Alley room of Weinstein Hall. Okay, so you have to leave the building when you came in, take a right, and the Weinstein Hall is to the right. Okay? In addition to the reception, we will have copies of General Hayden's book, Playing to the Edge, and he'll be there to sign them if you would like. And I also want to welcome everyone to our next address, which will be on March 17th. So we have a little time in between. Steve Presser from Northwestern University will be here. Once again, we'll see you at the reception.